Title: I went hiking in the Appalachians and came back feeling wrong. I don't tell this story more than once to anyone. Not because it's hard to talk about, but because the more I say it out loud, the more I notice little things about my own voice that don't feel mine. This happened in the Appalachian Mountains a couple of years ago. Not some unnamed backcountry hell, not an off-map trail, but a legitimate loop route I'd hiked several times before. Routine. Predictable. The kind of trail where the hardest thing you expect is a blister or a storm. I went out alone, which is normal here. You're far enough from cities that miles of forest feel more natural than streetlights. The trailhead was a small gravel lot with a faded sign, a couple of garbage bins, and a narrow path disappearing into the trees. The weather was clear but cool. The air smelled like wet leaves, damp earth, and pine. The kind of late fall crispness that raises the hairs on your arms even though it's not that cold. I left early, aiming to finish before dark. I got back after dark. That's the first thing I was wrong about. The first hint that something was off showed up around midday. I was in a narrow section of trail that cuts through a V-shaped valley between two ridges. The trees are taller there, the canopy closes in, and the sound of your own footsteps feels unnaturally loud. The earth is soft, the roots are exposed, and the light feels muffled, like the woods are holding its breath. I remember stopping for a moment because the air changed. Not in any measurable way. No drop in temperature. No sudden wind. Just a subtle drag in the atmosphere, like the forest had taken a breath and held it. I looked around, saw nothing out of the ordinary, and kept walking. About 10 minutes later, I realized the trail markers were different. Not obviously wrong, just slightly off. The blazes on the trees lined up a little too cleanly. The spacing was a bit too uniform, the paint looked a little too fresh, the edges too sharp. The blue was darker than it should have been on weathered bark. Some of them looked like they'd been sprayed over an older mark, like someone had redrawn them recently. I didn't think much of it. Trails get maintained. Volunteers repaint blazes in the off-season. It happens. I didn't realize yet that I was seeing the trail in a way it wasn't meant to be seen. I just followed the markers. The real change happened on the way down. I was following what I thought was the correct route, but the path felt narrower than I remembered. The trail curved to the right in a way that didn't match the mental map I carried with me. The slope under my boots felt the same, but the way the trees lined up felt wrong. I stopped and tried to orient myself. No phone service. No GPS. Just trees, slope, the faint sound of a distant stream. I decided to trust the markers. That's the last thing I did that felt like me. At some point, an amount of time I can't accurately place, the world shifted. Not dramatically. No flash of light. No sound. Just a subtle alteration in the way the light hit the trees and the way the air felt on my skin. The sound of my footsteps changed, not in volume, but in texture, like someone had turned a knob on the air itself. When I looked up, the trail markers were gone. Not faded. Not covered by growth. Just gone. No blazes on the trees. I backtracked until I found one again. It was there, but it looked wrong. The paint was darker, almost wet-looking, the edges unnaturally sharp. The shape of the mark was slightly different, like it had been redrawn by hand, by someone who had only seen it once and tried to copy it from memory. I kept walking. The markers kept changing. Sometimes there were two on the same tree, one faintly overlapping the other. Sometimes the color was off, a few orange marks instead of the usual blue. The shapes grew sharper, more uniform, like whatever was touching them wanted them to look correct. I didn't stop to think about the inconsistency. I just followed them. At some point, I realized I was truly alone. Not just in the way hikers are alone. In the way you feel when the world falls silent even though nothing has visibly stopped. I couldn't hear birds. I couldn't hear wind in the trees. Not even the sound of my own footsteps. The forest was muting itself. I could still see my boots hitting the ground. I could still feel the slope under my feet. But the sound was missing. I turned around, thinking I'd strayed from the trail. No blazes. No path. Just trees. Not dense enough to be impassable, but dense enough that direction lost meaning. I tried to retrace my steps, but every turn felt like it led me back to the same spot. Then I saw the first one. Between two trees, just off the trail. A figure. Not human, not animal. More like something that had studied a human and tried to copy it from the wrong angle. Its posture was wrong, too upright in some places, too slumped in others. Limbs looked too long, joints bent in a way that didn't quite match healthy bone structure. The skin looked wrong, too smooth in places, too ridged in others, like it had been stretched and resewn. I didn't move. It didn't move. It just watched. Not with eyes, there was no real face. More like a sense of direction, a weight of attention fixed on me. I backed away slowly, not turning my back, until I felt the ground under my boots change. I was on the trail again. The markers were back. But the paint was darker now. The forest sounds returned all at once. Birds. Wind. The distant rush of a stream. It felt too sudden. Like someone had turned the volume knob back up. I didn't make it out by the time I planned. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sky was already dark. I didn't realize until I stepped out of the trees and saw the headlights of my car reflecting the weak light from the overhead moon. The parking lot was empty, which was normal. The car was where I left it. The air was cold, but the night was clear. I got in, started the engine, and drove toward the road. Everything felt fine, until I looked in the rearview mirror. My face looked normal. But my eyes were wrong. Not the shape of them. The way they moved. My reflection took a fraction of a second longer to follow my movements. I held it for a moment, watching. I blinked. The reflection blinked too. I frowned. The reflection frowned, but the expression was a little delayed, like it was watching me and then copying. I looked away. I don't remember how long the drive home took. I do remember pulling up to the house and sitting in the car for a long time, staring at the front door. When I finally went inside, I checked the bathroom mirror. The reflection looked completely normal. Perfect. I told myself I was just tired. I washed my hands, checked the locks, and went to bed. The next few days started subtly wrong in a way I didn't immediately recognize as dangerous. Not terrifying. Not obviously wrong. Just off. I kept catching myself doing things that didn't feel like habits. I'd start a sentence and lose the tail end of it, realizing I had no clear memory of what I'd planned to say. I'd stare at familiar objects longer than necessary, trying to place their names or uses. I'd find myself standing in the hallway, not remembering why I'd walked there. I started talking to myself less. Not because I was self-conscious. Because my thoughts felt louder. Like something was listening. Like something was waiting for me to speak. The first time I noticed something visibly wrong in the mirror, I was brushing my teeth. I caught my reflection blinking a split second after I did. I stared at it. It stared back. I moved my hand slowly. The reflection moved its hand, but the timing was a little delayed, as if it was watching me and then copying. I turned away and didn't look at it for the rest of the night. I checked it again the next morning out of curiosity. Everything looked normal. I told myself it was stress. I'd been hiking at dusk. I'd been tired. Isolation does weird things. I convinced myself so thoroughly that I almost believed it. Then it happened again. And again. And again. The reflections stopped lagging. They started anticipating. I would think a word, and the reflection's mouth would already be shaping it before mine did. I would decide to turn my head, and the reflection would already be in the middle of the movement. I began avoiding mirrors. I covered the bathroom mirror when I wasn't using it. I kept the hallway closet mirror covered with a towel. I unplugged the TV when I wasn't watching it so the screen wouldn't turn into a dark mirror when idle. I started noticing other reflective surfaces I'd never thought about before: windows at night, polished tiles, the surface of my phone, the curve of my car's dashboard. Every time I caught my reflection in one of them, it felt like it was watching me from the wrong side. Not me. Something wearing me. The worst part started when the reflection stopped waiting for me. I was in the bathroom one evening, not planning to do anything except wash my hands, when I looked up and the reflection was already there. Not still. Not frozen. Already moving. It had my face. My hair. My clothes. But its movements were smoother. More confident. The way it tilted its head, the way it shifted its weight, it looked like a practiced version of me. I froze. It didn't. It raised its hand slowly, studying its own fingers, like it was testing the fit. I backed away. I heard my own voice, but it wasn't me who spoke. "Hey," the reflection said, calmly. The words left my mouth, but my lips didn't move. I didn't remember deciding to say anything. I left the bathroom and didn't go back in for the rest of the night. Since then, I've tried to keep a distance between me and every reflective surface. I avoid glass buildings when I'm outside. I don't look at my car windows unless I absolutely have to. I've even started taping my laptop screen with a matte cover so the reflection doesn't catch me by surprise. But I know it's not enough. Because the reflection isn't in the mirror. It's inside my head. I can feel it now when I'm alone. A second layer of thought, just beneath mine. Sometimes it feels like it's guiding my words. Sometimes it feels like it's finishing my sentences before I can. Sometimes I'll catch myself saying something in a tone I don't remember choosing. I talk less. I write more, and even then I edit carefully, watching for sentences that sound like someone else wrote them. The first time it started changing my body, I thought I was dreaming. I was in the bathroom again, and I looked at my hand under the sink faucet. The water felt normal. The weight of my hand felt normal. But my fingers were slightly longer. Not grotesque. Just off. I stared at them, trying to tell myself I was just tired. I counted my fingers, traced the joints, flexed them slowly. They were mine. But they weren't. I looked up at the mirror. My reflection was watching me with the same intensity, but its fingers were perfect. Smooth. Even. Mine looked a little ragged in comparison. I left the room quickly. Later that night, I caught my reflection in the side of the microwave door. I was standing there, staring at the blank surface, not even thinking about it. Then I saw it. My hand, in the reflection, flexed all the way to the fingertips, articulating every joint with a fluidity that felt impossible. I looked at my actual hand. It had moved the same way. But I didn't remember deciding to move it. It felt like my nervous system had taken a bus ride someone else had bought the ticket for. I walked away and didn't look at any reflective surfaces for the rest of the night. The changes started happening faster after that. Small things. My smile became smoother. My posture straightened without me noticing until I saw it in a glass door. My voice lost its rough edges. Sometimes I'd catch myself laughing at something before I'd had time to understand it was funny. My thoughts started feeling like borrowed goods. I would wake up with phrases already in my head, sentences half-formed, as if I'd been editing them in my sleep. I started recording myself speaking into my phone just to hear what came out of my mouth. Not because I was paranoid. Because I was becoming strangers to myself. The first time something inside me hurt, I was in the middle of nowhere between errands. I was standing in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the refrigerator, when a sharp pressure surged behind my left eye. Not pain. Pressure. Like something was rearranging the back of my skull. I doubled over, clutching my head, waiting for it to pass. It didn't. It built slowly. I sat down, put my head between my knees, tried to breathe. Then I felt it again. In my chest. In my ribs. In my spine. Like something was tightening screws that weren't supposed to be there. I remember looking up at the window above the sink. The reflection in the glass showed me doubled over, clutching my head, but the reflection's face wasn't mine. Not yet. But it was close. Its expression was calmer. Its features were smoother. Its hairline was straighter. I watched as the reflection blinked, and in that moment, I felt a strange, almost pleasurable click in the back of my skull. Like something had locked into place. I stood up, shaking. The pressure in my head didn't fully go away. It just settled. I went to bed that night and tried not to move. I could feel my body slowly adjusting itself while I lay there. Minor twitches. Tiny shifts in muscle tension. Like fat settling on a steak. The most disturbing change started when I realized I could no longer differentiate between my thoughts and its thoughts. Not at first. At first, I could still tell when a sentence felt wrong. When a word choice sounded too polished. Too clean. Too practiced. But the more time passed, the more those sentences started to feel natural. I would catch myself using them in conversation, and the people I was talking to wouldn't notice anything off. Because it was good. It sounded articulate. Reasonable. Persuasive. I started sounding like the person I wanted to be, not the person I actually was. Which made it terrifying. Because I realized I was losing the ability to argue with myself. Every time I tried to think no, it felt like the reflection was already there, ready with a better version of the sentence. A smoother word. A calmer tone. A more reasonable counter. I stopped talking out loud as much. I wrote less. I sequestered. I started sleeping with the blinds shut, the reflective surfaces covered, the room as dark as possible. But I couldn't cover my own eyes. The worst moment came when I looked in the mirror and realized I didn't know who I was seeing. Not in the existential, who am I, way. In the literal, which one of us is leaning over the sink, way. I was washing my hands, staring at the water running between my fingers, when I realized I wasn't controlling my movements anymore. My hands were doing exactly what they were supposed to do, but my mind was elsewhere. I looked up at the mirror. The reflection was watching me with my own face, but its eyes were clearer. Its jaw was tighter. Its shoulders were straighter. I blinked. The reflection blinked. But this time, I felt the urge to blink first, like it was coming from the reflection and traveling backward into me. I stepped back. I left the bathroom. I spent the evening avoiding all glass, all mirrors, all reflective surfaces. I even put a blanket over the toaster to block the small metal surface. I went to bed early. I lay in the dark, trying not to think too much. Because I was starting to realize that every time I thought, it was like handing the mirror a new piece of clay to shape. Since then, I've tried to go back into the woods. Not to the same trail this time. Just near it. I drove to the trailhead again, parked in the same gravel lot, and looked into the trees. For a long time, there was nothing. Then I heard footsteps. Not from the trail. From just beyond the edge of the trees. Walking in the same rhythm as mine. I recognized it. Not the sound. The timing. It matched. I didn't wait to hear a voice. I turned and left. Because I already know what it would say. It would say my name. Only cleaner. Only smoother. Only more confident. And this time, I'm not sure who I'd be talking to.